to go live, I feel like. So let me just check and see if we are indeed live, because we may not be.
A little awkward.
That's okay.
Beginning. A little.
Well, I didn't know it would like if we had anything.
I doubt
You're so
anybody's
dark,
watching at this
especially
very
next
moment.
to me.
Okay, so we are live. So hopefully everyone can hear us, and we'll do an intro. So welcome to the Fall Book Club, everybody. We're streaming live from Twitch, and if you're watching from YouTube, be sure to join us on Saturdays at 8 p.m. ish Central Time. And I'm gonna introduce a few people. Just to the bottom corner, this is the radiant Riley Thompson. Wave at everybody. In the fourth quadrant, we have the bodacious Brooke Bella. Yes, and to my side is the reliable Ren Malone. I did those
Oh my
intros.
god!
I really liked the alliteration for this
That
week.
was good.
So
Nice.
I'm thinking we'll do
Well done.
We'll do new adjectives every week for everyone. So today we'll be discussing The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and we are going to dip into this science fiction as best as we can. My microphone won't screw up. So everybody, open their hymnals to chapter 1.
I have it on my phone. Okay. All right.
Got it.
I'm having a microphone malfunction.
One thing I just realized, the chapters in this book don't have titles.
Do they not?
No, they're just chaptered.
They're just numbers?
Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel
and
like
that
this
helped us better with the other book.
Yeah.
Kind of like give it what's going on.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a silly thing, but is that to ask? But is that like an unusual?
I don't know. I don't know what like
maybe
the
it's like
standard
common
is
for the
books.
time. I feel because I feel like nowadays all chapters usually have like a title.
One thing I should have looked at that I didn't. I wonder how these books. I wonder if this book started like being printed in a newspaper or something as like a serial, and then was pulled together
Maybe.
and released as a novel later. Because it seems like a lot of old stories were done that way.
Look.
But I don't know anything about it. I should have.
Someone said no. H.G. Wells did the title of his chapters in War of the Worlds.
He did title his chapter. Okay.
It might have been. People can hear me right now.
They were published as novellas. As a novellas.
As a novellas.
As a novellas.
Is that Benny?
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so now we have that problem fixed. Yeah, so I think that this was what it was, because this is a really small book. It's basically the size of a novella,
Yeah.
and if not, it's very close.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it was published in like the different like novella magazines or something like that as different thriller stories.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think that's the case, because from what I can tell, the chapters don't follow like like the traditional story. Like I wouldn't expect one chapter to be, but maybe they would do that as like a series. I don't know. We got to find out more on that.
I don't.
We'll definitely have that next week whenever we do it. So we're gonna do summarization of chapter 1. Does anybody want to take a stab? If not, I have them.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 is awesome.
Chapter 1 is pretty awesome.
I imagine the time traveler as you, Maverick.
Is me?
But like in your like
I did that
Rick
once or
costume.
twice. I was
That's
imagining
great.
like, what would this guy look like? And then I was like, what if Maverick dressed up for this
For
character?
this, yeah, just him coming out like
Definitely passed
Yeah.
through my mind. But also, this guy is like
great.
talked about with gray hair a little bit, or
Imagine
graying hair.
Maverick with gray hair. It's
Um,
just him
but-
luring all his friends.
Yeah,
to a dinner
chapter
party.
1 is like an after dinner gathering of men. Most of them seemingly pretty prominent men in their community and whatever. I guess they live in London.
Yeah.
That was my impression.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
they keep.
Yeah, because they
well,
talk about the Thames, the river.
the Thames.
Is it the Thames?
Yeah.
So,
the Thames.
There's one interesting thing too here is that up this entire story, up until chapter 4, we don't have any proper nouns used for anything. So
no one has a name even.
Yeah,
like
no one
they
has a
just
name.
call him like, oh, you're medicine man.
Yeah.
You're the publisher.
You're the doctor, the psychologist.
Yeah, the psychologist, and even the narrator doesn't have a name. So
Yeah.
we're kind of pinging off all these ideas.
I believe
And-
it's kind of suggested that the narrator
Is
is
the
H.G.
psychologist.
Wells himself.
Really?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that would be
Oh,
I
yeah,
hadn't picked up on
maybe.
That
He
he's
doesn't
just
even
like
talk-
writing the book as it was told
like
to him.
telling
Yeah.
him.
He doesn't
the
even
story.
talk in this though. He like never says anything.
Well, he does,
to
yeah.
anyone.
Oh
He
yeah,
says,
he does.
I said, there
That's
are a few
the end of
times where
chapter 2, I think, right?
where people
Oh,
talk
he-
to him.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
He talks throughout these conversations though a little bit.
Oh, I didn't remember him talking. I just
Ooh.
like
There is a problem with these gatherings though but it comes in a later chapter, so I'll talk about it when we get there.
So we're at the dinner, right? And everyone's talking, and we get introduced first to the psychologist, right?
I believe so. Philby, I think, is the first one to talk. He's like
Philby.
it says he's an argumentative person with red hair.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which, just like a quick note on Philby that I made, is that he's redheaded, and it's kind of funny that he's somewhat of a like more antagonistic character because he's really doubtful. You know, not that he's in the wrong, but I think it's funny that there's an antagonistic redhead in this story, just like
Again.
there was last
Yeah.
Locally Red,
Yeah.
Just like in
Lord of the Flies.
Man,
but
redheads
not
are
nearly to the
always
same
bad.
degree.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So
Poor
they're
redheads.
just talking about casual things, and then they lead into a conversation that
Yeah.
the time traveler, which they refer
It's
to.
They're
kind
in
of like
his
the
home.
Twilight Zone at the beginning of the Twilight Zone. That's like, let me take you on a journey that will bend your mind. And
Yeah.
he's sitting there.
Yes.
And if you can just imagine like those those kind of like smoking rooms that like old 19th century people have in their chairs.
I
and
love these
their
settings
velvet
of just
couches,
men smoking cigars after
Yeah.
cigars,
dinner
and it's
Yeah.
all candle lit. They don't
having
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah. And so
They're all
basically
having like
he's telling these men like, you need to drop everything that you've ever learned. Like, you don't know anything. You need to drop what you know about geometry. That was the big like lead in. Like,
yeah.
what you know about geometry is wrong. Like talking
He's
about
like, I'll start small. Forget everything you know about geometry. And they're
Yeah.
like, well, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they were just like, it seems like they're just waxing poetic at this point, that they're just kind of talking. And he's like saying, there's actually a fourth dimension, which is time. Like, we
Yeah.
don't just have.
Yeah, he brings.
the relative
First, he
space.
says he's like they think that they know what the fourth dimension is. They've theorized about it, but in actuality, time is the fourth dimension.
Yeah.
Time is just another form of space in which can be traveled around in.
Yeah, they
Which-
talk about how you can't move as freely through time, and he's like, yeah.
But
he's-
even they start talking about you can't really move that freely through space,
Space
either.
either.
Like
Because
up
you
and
can
down.
only move left to right, but you can't move up or down.
Yeah, and that
they're
it's
like,
restricted
you kind
by-
of can.
by gravity.
Yeah.
And they were saying
Yeah.
how time like wasn't restricted by gravity, which if this book did not exist, we would not have movies like Interstellar
Mhm.
and
Yeah, as far
like
as
huge movies, science
goes,
fiction goes. This is setting the stage for everything
really
that we
is.
know. Oh, this movie called Mr. Nobody, like talking about like, you know,
Yeah.
have you
Is
seen
that Jake
movie?
Gyllenhaal?
Jared
No,
Leto.
Jared Leto.
Yeah.
Oh, you've seen it? It's so good.
Yeah, it's a good. So like I feel
So-
like this is a pioneering novel for science fiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's almost believable, like him saying, like, let me explain to you all this. So you're reading it and you're like, of course, time is the fourth dimension. Makes so much sense.
I feel like
Yeah.
Wells' dialogue at the start of this whole story is a little bit daunting. Like, you start reading it, and I talked with
yeah.
you a little bit about this the other day. Just the very first paragraph is just like, it's a lot of big words, and
Yeah, I
you're
was
just
like,
you're a little bit like, oh no, what exactly am I getting myself into? But I think the more you read, the more fun and playful it starts to become.
that's
Yeah.
the exact thought I had too, because it was kind of difficult to read at first, and I was like, I can tell exactly when this was written just because of the language
Yeah.
he used, and it was kind of hard to get through. But then
Yeah.
the more like you're understanding the conversation and stuff, and you get the kind of language he uses,
And the movie or the story moves at a very brisk pace.
I feel
too,
like
which
it's
is
good
really
at
helpful.
getting you
Yeah.
to understand
point.
what it's talking about,
Yeah.
even if you don't understand
Yeah, it's
everything.
amazing how easy all of it is to understand, considering it was written like
Every
over
once in
100
a
years
while,
ago
there'll
now.
be a
Mm-hmm.
word that comes out, and I'm like,
Oh,
I have to look it up.
That
always
thing he
keep-
keeps
I
talking
keep
about
my
by the
phone with me,
Sphinx.
and I just have Google open, and anytime I
yeah.
come across a word that is out of my vocabulary, I look it up, and
I feel terrible. I just use context and assume.
Me
Really?
too. I'm like, I won't use
I used to do
Google,
that
I'll
all the
just
time,
read.
but I
Yeah.
was like, you know what? I have technology to know this now, and I'll like hit the pronunciation button where
I'll use like my because you're right. That was one of the things Spaden typed in the chat, was that she was like, "Oh, geometry's in here." Like it was like, it's very like
Yeah.
you know, kind of intimidating first chapter, because
Yeah.
it's just so much science fiction being thrown your way immediately.
It's super
Yes.
heavy going to a dinner party and then him like laying this out on them, and everyone's like, okay, sure.
I do love that he
Yeah.
jumps like basically right into the thick of the story, though.
But
Yeah.
it sounds
Yeah.
like they've been to other dinner parties at his house.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. These are
So the
because
stage
they-
is already set for
Yeah,
all of this stuff.
because the
going into it.
narrator says that he has been to the most dinner parties out of anyone else. So it sounds like he's been going to this guy's house for like
Yeah.
a couple weeks in a row.
Here's
so yeah,
something.
I really
Spaden says that she read it on Kindle, and that was really easy, because if
Yes.
she needed a
Oh,
definition, she could just
nice.
highlight it. So if we'll have to figure that out, because we use we buy all of our books from a local bookstore here where we live, called the Burrowing Owl, and this is where we get all of our copies.
Support your local bookstore.
Yeah, because we
Yeah.
love to support our local
Yeah, the
bookstores.
little
But I will have to say
bookmark.
Nice.
that being able to have like a copy on, because I have a Kindle myself as well, and it is, and all of our phones have Kindle on it, so it would be really easy to do that if we wanted to tackle like a Shakespeare or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which I
Please
do.
don't do that to me.
Yeah.
I do recognize like how convenient that is, but at the same time,
I
mean,
prefer paper.
Yeah,
I do
nothing really
too.
beats having a book in your hands.
Yeah.
It's different.
Oh yeah,
It's so much better.
My actual copy has like this really like, it looks like very old fashioned handwriting in it.
I
and
feel
people
like I'm-
underlining it.
Oh,
Aw, that's
really?
cool.
Yeah,
I feel
someone's
like
school book.
I sound like a hipster talking about it like that. Like, oh, it's just, you know, when the smell of it and the feel of it.
Oh, I like pen.
the
I
vinyl,
like
the way the vinyl sounds when it
Right.
hits your ears is just different.
Yeah,
And
we'll
it's
Man,
just
stop being
like,
such a hipster.
I know, right?
that's why in the description below, both for the YouTube and the live Twitch and the info, we have sponsored links to the books here. So if you don't have a copy of the book yet and you would like to get one and follow along for the next like 8 chapters or so, then you can. You totally have time to get it in before next week and read the remaining chapters. If you use that link in the description below, then a portion of that sale will go and support our book club. So the Fall Book Club will benefit from it, and we would really appreciate your support that way. But yeah, so different words. The way that I gauge it too is like if I see a word and I'm like familiar with it, or it sounds like one I would use in the future, then I'll look it up and I'll learn that word. If
Oh.
it sounds super pompous and I would be embarrassed to like use that word because I would sound super snooty and uppity, and it's like there are synonyms, like 15 other regular synonyms for that word,
Yeah.
then I won't look the definition up, because there's a few words in here that are like, what is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first one, it was like he was expounding a recondant matter to us. So like recondant,
Yep.
Right. And I
it-
wouldn't use that word.
I think it's
Yeah.
recondant.
Recondant, yeah.
It's like little known.
But that's
That's
why I
what
look
it
up.
means. It's little known.
I read it as recondant, and then I looked up the word on Google, and then hit that sound button.
And it's
and
recondant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good idea.
Recondant.
I did notice
Recondant.
some things about like the grammar of this, where maybe I've just never paid much attention before, but I realized for the first time while reading this that Americans and Brits spell travel with an added suffix differently.
What do you
So
mean?
like traveling or traveler, Americans use one L, but Brits use 2 L's.
Yeah.
But I just never had noticed. I mean, it's like
They do a
theater
lot
or
of
something
weird
where
stuff.
the
Oh,
the
yeah.
letters are moved around.
That's
or,
how
or
Maverick
color.
spells the.
That's how I spell it.
Um,
R-E.
Okay,
Trip.
so this is a rabbit hole. Okay, but the spelling of theater. Okay, the two different spellings. This is not an English versus American spelling, although England probably keeps their spelling separate. So, R-E is like going to the theater, the location
Yeah.
of it. But no, that's the ER is going to the location, and the RE is the
Like
concept of the theater.
Yeah.
Is the
Okay.
theater. Like, I am a part of the theater collection.
Okay.
Honestly,
member of
I
the-
didn't know until like high school that there was another spelling of theater, that it was ER.
And you
I had
wouldn't,
always spelled it RE.
Yeah.
unless you like started doing like actually like in like college or something like that, you would never
Yeah.
know the difference between
But
the two
there's a
spellings.
lot of, I spell a lot of things the British way anyway, because I went to school in India for a bit, and that's like a British country.
There's
so
he also, and this is probably not so much a British thing, it's just like an outdated thing, but tonight and tomorrow are
Hyphenated.
night.
yeah, I noticed that
Yeah.
was weird.
Yeah, I think they just kind of morphed into one word.
And then also when people are describing something that happened and relating it to a specific location, they say at this city instead of in this city. Like we were shopping at Amarillo
right
rather than in Amarillo.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Which is just interesting little things I noticed. And I guess since it's a book club, I thought, yeah, let's discuss some of the vocabulary and grammar
yeah,
and
the phrasing of it. It's really interesting.
linguistics here.
And like the way that Wells writes the book too is that even all of these different changes in it. First of all, the dialogue is distinctly British, and
Yeah.
so it's almost seamless. Like these different, phrasings. I never even hardly even noticed them unless you bring it up, and I'm like, oh yeah,
Right.
that was that way, huh? That
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
snuck in there. I was just like, this is normal. This is fine.
I certainly took a lot more notes for chapter 1 than I did for chapter 4.
Chapter 1 is so intense. Like
It's got a lot.
is.
and it's very like, it's one of my favorite things because it really like sets the stage. It's like here it like I said, it's like the Twilight Zone. It's like, you need to forget everything that you know and
Yeah.
to allow yourself into a universe where like crazy things can happen, and everybody's sitting around like, sure, like we're very intelligent men, like we know, and like, and then he says like, basically there's no difference between time and any of the three dimensions of space except for our consciousness moves along it. So like our consciousness moves along time. So he's trying to explain that to his friends, and like nobody's being really receptive until he comes in and he brings this machine and sets it on the table.
I like how he kind of, the idea of recalling a past event in your own mind, he talks about it like your mind is time traveling back, but only for a brief moment.
Oh,
Can
I
you
love
Right.
that
Like you're revisiting that.
concept.
And
Yeah, and he's like, well, you always travel back in time whenever you think of like a memory.
You
And
just
like
don't physically
you
do
can
it.
decide how long you want to be back there and like think about this memory.
Because
but you
time-
can't travel forward or something.
Because he
like
does
that.
compare time a little bit to our own consciousness.
Yeah.
And how we know it's a thing that exists. It's just not something that's like tangible. In
Which
any
is
way.
super interesting too, because you can look up online, and I'll try and find the video for this to put into the description for you guys to watch, because it's very pertinent to all of this science fiction. But they've already been able to prove that time is entirely subjective.
Yeah.
And it's physically subjective. There are different visual things that you can use, visual tools that you can use to find that physical objects are perceived at a large delay, not only from our retinal perception between our retinal imagery entry to our brain comprehension, but also like physically in the world. It's so wild. So listening, like reading this in the book, I was like, yeah. And it was also reminding me of like when I was a kid or like younger, I had this idea about so I thought about the future, right? Like a specific moment in the future. And everyone does this, like about like, where am I going to be in the future, and like different images in your head about who you might be in the future, what might be happening. And I would have all these ideas and then like let 10 years go by. And then just randomly at some point, and it's similar to deja vu, but not quite the same. You think back about that one moment in which you thought about this moment. And you've created 2 points and 2 direct lines of consciousness between a decade of time.
It feels like a weird Inception moment.
It really is, because you're like, wow, it seems like it feels like it was just moments ago that I was thinking about this exact moment, this exact experience that I would have. and I'm having it now. And I can't in that moment perceive the time that had passed.
Yeah.
And so it feels like I just transported instantly to the future. Mm-hmm. And that's so awful. Like, it makes me feel like I'm going to die. And then, like, because it makes me feel like just me, the act of thinking of the future is the transportation.
Yeah.
And so creating that future in your head with your perception and your consciousness is what creates it in the first place.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This book, I'm really loving the science fiction.
Me
It's
too.
so
And it
solid.
really does like
It's
beg
good.
the question, like, is it science fiction? Like, I mean, like, is time like a relative like construct, or is it something that, like, you know, we're just perceiving it, or is it something that can actually like be played with, like people can actually time travel? Because like
I know a few years ago, before he died, Stephen Hawking threw a party for time travelers
no
to
one
prove
no one
that time
came.
travel will never be possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't know anything about the science of it, but I would be willing to take Stephen Hawking's word for it that
Yeah,
it's probably
I
not
don't think
possible
it's
based
possible.
on anything that we know now.
I don't think you would be
I don't
able
think
to
we'll
travel
reach-
to a certain moment in time, especially if time is
or if
relative.
you did it, you couldn't
Yeah.
control it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think you'd be able to like point
It's not
to a
something you can
spot.
steer a saddle.
Yeah, he sits
ship
on
through.
his saddle
I mean-
and like has his
I mean,
little
that is
lever.
like a whole big thing about like being able to travel like rapidly, so like the speed of light. Being
Yeah.
able to do things at the speed of light. Like, that's a big thing about space travel, and that goes in with time travel. If you can travel the speed of light, like, you can basically travel anywhere very quickly.
Which we get into more of that science fiction type thing in later chapters. He talks about that in one of these future chapters. So to sum up chapter 1, I'll read, or what? Go.
I was just gonna say, like, something that Riley just started getting into is just that they have like their discussion about it, and then he brings out this little model of
to show
an
them.
actual
Yes.
time machine that he's built to show them that it's something he has been working on for many years now, and he's designed it, and he can actually send something into the future or send something through time. So he sets it on a little table, and everybody's gathered around, and he pushes a little lever on it. He has somebody else do it. And he has
That's so
them all
smart.
examine it, too,
Yeah.
so that they
Like,
can
look at
definitively know that there's no trick or anything
And he's like,
going
and I
on.
want you to do it so you know that like it's actually happening, and I'm not the one doing it.
I love the way he describes it, too, where it, like, kind of turns, and then it just, like, there's a ghost of the image left of it, and a little bit
that
of a
was
shimmer,
so
and then it's
cool.
just gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
The imagery in this book is really good. Whenever it describes any, like, even him traveling forward in time. We're not on that chapter
not on
yet,
that
but I
yet.
love
So-
how it's
On-
written.
Yes.
On the last page of the chapter, the medical man who's there says, "Look here, are you perfectly serious, or is this a trick like that ghost you showed us last Christmas?" And for one, I like that the time traveler seems to have, like, I don't know, like a sense of humor about him. But also I was wondering if Wells was referencing something there, like maybe another short story he had written, or
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Like-
It was so funny.
what the scenario was that has
There's,
to do
like,
with this
another-
ghost. It just kind of hints at this other
Yeah.
instance, and then that's
Yeah.
it.
Like, all these people discussing it, and they're like, one guy's like, our ancestors have no tolerance for anachronisms, which means like something that's like out of time. Like, they were like, our ancestors like were not okay with that.
Yeah.
So they were like, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Like, basically, it was super funny.
Yeah, they
I think it's interesting, like, whenever he says that, because the psychologist is the narrator, right?
no.
No.
He's another person.
who's
Okay,
the-
all the people who are there,
Yes.
there is the time traveler himself, and it's at his home, I believe.
Yeah.
And
it's
there's
at his-
Philby, the argumentative redhead, a psychologist, a very young man, the provincial mayor, and a medical man, and the narrator.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people there.
So he's a separate person.
And that's where the issue that I have with the later chapter comes in, because he describes the people that are there, but it's not exactly consistent.
Well, there's different
okay, listen,
people
there's
there
different
each
people
time.
for different reasons.
There are
Yeah.
different people there, but
Yeah.
the people that he describes that are still in attendance from the previous week are not. It's not accurate to
Yeah.
what he described before.
Right.
Oh, he says like they're there again. I know he said the psychologist is there the second time, and then the medical man is there again, right?
Well,
and then there was the editor
with the first chapter,
the
it ends with them agreeing that they're going to come back in 1 week to have dinner at his place again, and he will provide further evidence.
The psychologist was the only person besides the doctor and myself who had attended the previous dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And at the very get-go, if we're going to segue into chapter 2, very get-go, everyone's like, I don't think any of us believe the time traveler. That's like what they were saying.
Yeah.
They thought that it was a trick. They were like, well, didn't you see that candle blow out? Like, obviously, it was a trick. I don't know about it. They basically said, I don't know how it was done, but it's got to be a trick.
Yeah.
And that's how chapter 2 starts. He says, I think that at the time, none of us quite believed in the time machine.
Yeah.
And I like the sentences that follow. He says, the fact is the time traveler was one of those men who are too clever to be believed.
Yeah.
You never felt that you saw all around him. You always suspected some subtle reserve, some ingenuity and ambush behind his lucid frankness. And I feel like that kind of plays off of him doing some sort of prank that involved a fake ghost last Christmas that they talk about.
I like that everyone that's there in each week has like a purpose of being there. So like the first day when he shows them this time machine, it's like all these intellectual people. So like a psychologist, a medical man, a doctor, like people that he wants to like talk to them about the fourth dimension, the possibility of like going through time. And then the second time, because he knows he's coming back from traveling forward in time, he gets like an editor, a journalist.
He's really trying to like make this.
Yeah, so he's getting certain people for certain things that he's doing to like everyone has a purpose of being there.
Like legitimize his own work, basically.
Yeah, and then he's got like random witnesses because he has the young guy and then the
it is funny
shy
that he
guy
describes
with a
one
beard
as the very young man, and that's it. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, okay. So with the second chapter, the dinner party consists of the narrator, the medical man, Blank, who is an editor of a well-known paper, the psychologist, a doctor, a certain journalist, and a quiet, shy man with a beard. And those two are Dash and Chose. I don't know which one's which, but their names were given later on. But he says, what was the line about the people? The psychologist was the only person besides the doctor and myself who had attended the previous dinner.
Yeah.
But the medical man was also there at the previous dinner, and the
I
medical
think maybe
man,
the doctor. Wait.
the medical man and the doctor are not the same person, because when the narrator arrives at the party the second week, the medical man is there, and then the doctor shows up. It says, "It's 7:30 now," said the medical man. "I suppose we better have dinner." And then a few lines later, it says, "And thereupon the doctor rang the bell." I don't know if that's. If he's just switching between calling him the medical man and the doctor, or what.
Either way,
maybe
it's a little
he is.
confusing. They just
know.
kind of throw out names, which just kind of like leads into like the people around. They're important. Their presence is important, but like they're being characters, they're not important in the story.
None of them have names.
So,
they're just the time.
It really just kind of turns into the time traveler's account. Of
they're nothing but personas.
Traveling through time.
They're just titles.
Yeah.
So they're not super necessary. So have we sufficiently summarized chapter 1?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
we're kind of into chapter 2.
Okay, to
now.
incap it, I'll read the summarization just to incap it, and then we'll go straight into chapter 2.
Okay.
So the time traveler in chapter 1 explores the concepts of space and time with a psychologist, a medical man, and
provincial mayor,
and all
a
kinds of
dinner
other
party,
prominent men, to which he claims the commonly accepted geometry of such dimensions are utterly wrong. For a good explanation of these commonly wrong and utterly wrong dimensional concepts, I will also include another video, because these science fiction stuff, there's a YouTube video that Carl Sagan did called The Fourth Dimension Made Easy. Carl Sagan does a good job on that. So the time traveler demonstrates with a small model machine that time travel is possible to the psychologist, the medical man, and these men. The little time machine disappears and confuses everyone, and the time traveler then leads them down a stairway to look at the full-size version of this time machine, leading into chapter 2.
Yeah.
Is that chapter 2?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay. So this is chapter 2 now, and everyone's come back to
Yeah, it's like a week
his
later.
house.
They're-
1 week later. 8
they're
days
supposed to meet for, or 8 days later?
later. 8 days.
They're meeting for dinner again at his house, and they expect him to be there, but he's not there when they get there. So they decide, all right, well, let's just start without him. He leaves a note, I believe.
Yeah, he said he basically was like, if I'm late, just go ahead and start eating. And they're
Which
all
is interesting
kind of
that he
waiting
is
around
late.
for him.
It's like, how can you be
Be
late
late
when
to
you
your
have
own-
a time machine?
I thought you
Own
were a
dinner
time traveler.
It just
But
gets
I guess-
away from you.
I guess the way it
Yeah,
steers
Maverick
or the
was
way
late to
it
his own
moves
book
through
club.
time maybe is not so easy to like pinpoint an exact
Right.
moment. So,
Which, to be honest,
Honestly-
like the fact that he got back there within like hours
Was
is
pretty cool.
impressive. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
really
like
impressive.
from what we know, it's pretty good that he's there anyway.
another
Yeah,
he
like
made
because
it
he
back.
spent like a week there.
Well, we don't know where there is yet.
yeah, we haven't got to that chapter
Okay,
yet.
so
Sorry.
another weird bit of like maybe outdated wording or just British wording. They say that day week, which means this same day last week.
oh
Yeah,
okay,
just
that
Weird.
was
Really
that day
that
week.
was weird.
That was another one of those things that I read and I was like, and then
Yeah.
discarded it because I was like,
And-
I don't know exactly what that means. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that means last week. I guess I don't know.
Yeah,
and it
it's
was
just like,
super
okay.
interesting.
So they're all gathered, eating their mutton and drinking their
Yeah,
champagne or wine or whatever.
they're being a little skeptical because they said basically trusting their reputations for judgment with him was like furnishing a nursery with eggshell china.
Oh, I love that.
So like, you know, they're kind of putting themselves out there for him.
And a lot of these people weren't here for the demonstration the
Yeah.
previous week.
So they're
they
like
don't
describing
know-
to them what happened.
And they all just think it's like a gag that he's putting on.
Yeah, everybody's like, sure.
And then
And they start making fun of him.
he
kind
shows up. And the narrator, I believe, is the first to see him come to the
Yeah.
door. And
Goes,
This
hello.
is such a good description too.
he
Like,
just
you
looks
can
so
see him.
Yeah, I
disheveled.
really like
and,
it.
Yeah. They said his coat was dusty and dirty and smeared with green down the sleeves. His hair discolored, and it seemed to me grayer, either with dust or dirt, or because its color had actually faded. His face was ghastly pale. His chin had a brown cut on it, a cut half healed. His expression was haggard and drawn, as if by intense suffering.
Right.
So like he's gone through it, and everybody's just like,
And I guess at this point, like conceivably, he could have gone through a bunch over the past week, but
Yeah.
little do they know it's been just over, like
a couple days.
Yeah.
well,
yeah,
I
a
mean,
few
he
days, like a
I
week.
guess it has been over a week, but it started and ended the same day because
Either way,
he's
there's
time
no
traveling.
reason why he should look like that.
Yeah.
Showing up to his party,
Like
and
he
he's
might.
just throwing
He's
himself down.
haggard.
He's got bloody socks on. His shoes aren't even
Yeah.
on his feet.
He's
Basically,
like limping, and only the narrator notices it.
He's
Yeah.
like, give me wine. And so like he like holds the glass out, and he's just like, I just imagine him holding his finger, and he's like chugs it.
Well, I love
Chugging
that-
like entire boss.
I love when he
holds it
finally
out
sits
again.
down to eat and they're like, you need to start telling us what happened. And he's just like, nope, I'm eating first. I am starving. And then at one point he slides his glass towards the quiet man with the beard and just starts tapping on it with his fingernail. And the guy like immediately takes that as his cue to just fill it up. And
Yeah. I
Everybody's
love
like, what the
Like,
heck
this
is
was-
going on?
This was like a really cool,
Mm-hmm.
such a cool part for his character. Like he's just such a badass, pretty much, you know,
Yeah.
because he
Yeah.
just comes in disheveled and stuff, and he's just like wolfing it down. He reminds me very much of like a Sherlock type character.
yes.
He's hyper intellectual, you know, very confident in everything that he does.
Yeah.
and it's just so good.
yeah.
I feel like Wells takes an opportunity to take a little swipe at journalists of the time too, because he describes the two journalists that are there. He says they were both the new kind of journalist, very joyous, irreverent young men, like
Yeah.
that they're just they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They kind
Whatever.
of like make fun of him. So like there's like a little segue where he's going up the stairs, and like that's where they can see he doesn't have any shoes on, just like bloody socks, and he's walking up the
Yeah,
stairs.
that
and they're
was
like,
what he had green. So he has green slime on his.
I think he has grass
Probably
stains.
yeah, grass stains on his
Yeah.
sleeves is
on
how
his
I took
body,
it.
so he's dirty and just nasty. And then when he's walking up, so obviously I guess he lost his shoes and had to like walk the terrain.
The journalist was saying, or
So-
rather shouting, when the time traveler came back. It feels like there is a personal vendetta here between H.G. Wells
And
and
journalists.
journalists.
Yeah.
Like something must have happened. He got a bad review or whatever to like kind of be
He's like,
trashing
you know
these
what?
dudes.
That's
I
why
put a journalist
the
in my book,
journalist
and I'm
is
not
like-
going to put them in a good light.
Yeah, the
makes-
journalist is sitting there when he goes up and he's like, what's his game? Like, what's he doing? And everybody's just like, this is serious. Like, we saw him make a machine disappear, so they're starting to like kind of put pieces together.
Yeah.
And then they're like, everybody else is like, what
Okay,
the
so
heck is
here,
happening?
here's a good piece right here. Faceless Reenactor says he was being H.G. Wells was slandered pretty relentlessly by the press because he was an avid socialist. And
There's
so,
a lot about
Oh.
communism and stuff in here.
There's one
Yeah.
point
Socialism.
where I will bring that up. I have highlighted it. I have a whole note on it. It is so funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's
It-
actually a really good line in there.
There's
it
a
makes
really
me think
good line in
of M. Night Shyamalan
Mm-hmm.
in Lady in the Water. The
Right.
character who's like this really great person that's going to save the future or whatever is a writer.
Yes.
And the one real ignorant, stupid person that keeps like impeding everything is a movie critic. And it's just like, it's just way too over the top.
it's
Like,
very obvious.
it's so
blatant.
obvious and
Yeah.
stupid. This is a little more
yeah.
subtle than that, but that's funny.
Very subtle. Yeah.
It just mentions a lot of stuff. It's like, is he going through one of his Nebuchadnezzar phases? Which, like, I guess Nebuchadnezzar is like a crazy king.
Yeah,
So they're like
yeah.
referencing that and
Throwing people in the furnace and whatnot.
Yeah, that was the weirdest bit of dialogue for me, trying to interpret it exactly, because they say, does our friend eke out his modest income with a crossing, or has he his Nebuchadnezzar phases? I was like,
Yeah.
what does
So-
that mean? Also, it says with a crossing question mark, or has he his Nebuchadnezzar phases, but it's all one sentence. Like, or isn't capitalized after the punctuation of a
Yeah.
question mark. It's a question mark in the middle of the sentence,
Yeah.
which
I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
It's just interesting.
And I
Very
don't know
odd.
if that's just the way
Strange.
people are speaking.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean,
And-
it's a good way to write it, because I understand exactly how
Yeah.
the question is being phrased or how the sentence is being phrased, but it's unconventional by at least today's standards to
Yeah.
put a question mark in the middle of
The
the sentence.
dialogue isn't really the same. They use different quotations from when people talk, so they just use like one quotation mark, not
Yeah.
two. So it's not like two quotation marks, people are talking.
Mm.
It's one quotation mark, and a lot of times it's not said so and so. People just kind of start talking.
Yeah.
It's usually
So-
when it's like bigger
Mm-hmm.
things of dialogue, like a paragraph, they'll just
Yeah.
put one and then
And it-
not at the end.
And
Yeah, it
so
really-
he
it-
sits down and he's like, after he takes a shower, and he's like, I need my meat. Where's my mutton? And
Where's
he's
my
like,
mutton?
And he's sitting there and he just eats.
We
And then
should
he
have
said,
prepared a feast of mutton to have before we had
Yeah,
this
we
I
should have
know,
all
I
eaten
know.
mutton.
and one question while he's eating, like, the narrator's like, did you go time traveling? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, it's too long of a story to talk about this over greasy plates. And so he takes
that was
them.
another really good, like, I love the imagery, like the
Yeah.
vibrations of this whole scene, because it's
Yes.
just like, that he would make a remark like that and choose to move everyone from out from over these greasy plates to go into the smoke room.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so like timely.
It is.
Yeah.
It's very timely.
And so they're all sitting in
No
the
pun
smoke
intended.
room, patiently
Yes.
waiting, kind of like children. Oh, yeah. And the journalist's like, I will give you 10 shillings per word that you
10
tell
shilling.
me. He's like, I will pay you if you tell me the story right now. And he's like, whatever, dude. He's like, nothing can get in the way of me and eating right now. So
I love that that's the whole chapter too, is like he doesn't get to the story yet throughout this
Yeah.
entire chapter. It's just him arriving, and he's clearly like been through something, and then they prepare for him to tell the story.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, do you have a summary for chapter 2?
I do have a summary
pretty
for
much
chapter
that's
2.
it.
So
That's
we
it. He
will
brings them in, and everyone's sitting by candlelight waiting.
we will end cap and summarize chapter 2. So in chapter 2, the next day, the same guests as before, including the psychologist, the narrator, and biographer of the book, find a note in the time traveler's house saying they should eat dinner with him, and that he was detained by some important matter. They begin eating dinner when the time traveler steps in the doorway, covered in dust, green stains all on him, no shoes, blood-covered socks. His hair looks faded almost. The cut on his chin is halfway healed. He He goes upstairs, changes clothes, takes a shower, comes back down, eats a large meal of mutton and wine, and then leads all of his guests into the smoke room to tell of the last 8 days, to which he lived in but 1 day.
Yes.
Which is important, I feel like.
Yeah, because he
It's an
was like,
important
I did
detail.
this like Thursday.
Yeah.
He said he was gonna go. I think it's probably not until chapter 3, but he said he was gonna go time travel earlier in the week, but one of his parts to his machine
was
was
like an
measured
inch
improperly.
too short.
Yeah.
It was like a nickel bar or something, and so he had to fix it, and so he wasn't able to leave until the day of the dinner party.
Right.
Anyway,
And so he lived 8 days in 1 day,
yeah.
and he had to come back.
So, which
Yeah.
is weird because he could have traveled back in time, I feel like, to a few days before, so he would still have like a little bit of period of rest, but maybe he wanted to arrive on the exact same day so that it would all be fresh in his mind.
I think maybe
I'm
it's the
not
thing you
sure.
said earlier where it's hard to control when
Yeah,
you
because
land.
he does kind of start talking about taking off, and it seems like it sort of picks up speed as it goes because he tested it first. He just does a little bit, and he doesn't see any change in his
Yeah, and it didn't sound like there was a
workshop.
lot of control whenever he's like
Yeah.
hurtling forward in time.
And at
Yeah.
first, it's just a few hours. It was like 10:30 or something in the morning when he first gets in it.
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
it's
it's
like
3.
he notices
Yeah.
the one change in the room is
Yeah.
the clock now says
So
3
he
something.
Yeah.
gets into the time machine when everyone is with him, right?
No.
No.
This
No,
is
he's
alone.
telling the story and he basically does it by himself.
Right. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
mistook
And so
that.
he gets in, or after he time traveling just a few hours, he's like,
Yeah.
all right, let's see what this
crank it
baby
up.
can
And
do.
And
he turns
and
the
he
nos
says
on.
before,
Yeah.
like right before he does it,
Like
he
Fast
said,
and the Furious.
I suppose... He says, I suppose a suicide who holds a pistol to his skull feels much the same wonder
Oh, it's so
at what will
good.
come next as I felt then.
It's interesting
So,
how he
yeah.
the comparisons that he draws to this and how they are kind of dark. Even like when he's time traveling, he's talking about how uncomfortable the feeling of it is.
Oh, it's
And-
so good. And he starts to like get scared that what if he like lands where a building is and like in a wall or something.
His
and he
atoms
doesn't-
like trying to fit themselves into the space of something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Oh,
like
it's
what if he
written
stops
so
and it
well.
causes an explosion because of that, because of his atoms trying to like
Stop,
be in
yeah.
the same place as
Yeah.
something else.
And he's like seeing all these buildings starting to go up and be built. He's
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
the moon go through all of its phases in the same spot.
and
Like
it becomes like a
I
glowing
love the
band in the
imagery of
sky
all of
because
it.
it's just
yeah, and
And
he's
it's
like
really beautiful
watching
writing
the
for
sun
the
go
time.
back and forth.
Like,
Yeah.
It was.
it's so
a
good.
magnificent description.
It
of, like,
paints
these
such a
different
picture.
images.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just to be clear too, like it almost sounds like we're describing like a time lapse, but the descriptions in the book don't give you the image of a time lapse. For me, it didn't. For me, it was more fluid. Like it wasn't just like flashes of frames. It was like it was
Much more
a
fluid.
fluid movement
Like,
of everything.
Isn't it a hyperlapse where it like looks like stuff is moving and like all
Right.
that stuff and it's going really fast? And I was thinking of it like that, where he's like watching everything happen, like buildings being built, getting torn down,
Right.
like the
Yeah.
landscape around him changing.
I love how
It's
he
so cool.
describes some of the buildings at a certain point. He says, I saw great and splendid architecture rising about me, more massive than any buildings of our time, and yet, as it seemed, built of glimmer and mist, which I felt like was a very accurate guess at buildings of the future, like made
Yeah.
of glass and shimmering a lot more than any buildings
Yeah.
of that time period.
Yeah.
And then he says, I saw a richer green flow up the hillside and remain there without any wintry intermission, which I guess by like today we could guess maybe that was like turf, astroturf or something like that.
Oh, it's even cool. He starts talking
But-
about like the different seasons going by and like suddenly everything is white and there's snow and then suddenly the snow is like disappearing and like coming back. Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah, it's really great.
I think it's even reenactor reminds us this was written in the late 19th century. So like even for us to like get an idea as to what, because we know now what a hyperlapse is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this was
But then that's like
Yeah.
new age stuff, really talking about time travel.
so to describe
Wells describing
and
this
he
is
even thought
brilliant.
about
Yeah.
he even thought about, you know, the whole butterfly effect. Like he said, like, so as long as I traveled at a high velocity through time, like it didn't matter. he basically said like there was a risk of him finding some substance in the space that he occupied, so like basically distorting time. And he said, so as long as I traveled at a high velocity through time, this scarcely mattered. I was, so to speak, attenuated. But he kind of expounds on that. So he says, so slipping like a vapor through the interstices of intervening substances. So he's saying he's like a vapor in time, just like flowing through because he's going so fast. So
kind of like how they talked about the previous chapter with the little model version of the time machine that he sent through time to prove to them that it was possible. They talk about how they can't see it because it's moving so much faster and it's more fluid through time. Which is why it doesn't exist in that space for them.
He keeps talking about the time machine as a saddle, so I'm imagining like just literally him sitting on a saddle, like pressing buttons, being like,
two levers.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Him like with a handle in front. He just like
my concept of a saddle is a little too Texan.
Yes, like so I'm imagining like a Western saddle.
He's probably on like a bicycle seat or something.
Yeah, I feel like what they eventually come up with for the movie adaptations is a little more dignified than what the book paints a picture of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's nice.
And then he's got this little lever that he switches.
He's got two levers.
Man, I wish it was.
But I kept wondering, what do these two levers do exactly?
One is probably to go forward, and one is probably to go backward.
Well,
they move both ways.
Yeah, he moves both of them to get going in this thing. And so I was like, what are you doing?
That's crazy.
What are they doing? I don't understand.
Yeah.
But I do like, he suddenly realizes, like, okay, I should probably stop. Like, he's terrified for a little bit. I think what he said was when he was thinking about traveling through time, the idea of suddenly stopping and causing an explosion or something because of his atoms was just like a passing, like something he had accepted while he was planning this trip. And now that he was actually moving through time and that was a real possibility, it was terrifying for him. And so he was scared to stop moving through time for a minute. And then he like suddenly had enough courage to do it, but that made him, he like describes himself like an idiot. He says he just suddenly pulled the lever back to stop it, which sent him flying off the machine and crashing into the ground in the time that he ends up in.
So how far forward did he think he was going? Because I did not expect him to go to the year 802,000.
Yeah, I don't know if he was really concentrating on like the year at all. I think he was just fascinated by watching the passage of time. And
I thought it just said the year 2000 at first.
Really?
And then I saw 802,000. I was like,
if he had any knowledge, I mean, I'm sure because he has like dials and stuff in there that like show him numerically the value of where he's
like
going.
where he is time-wise.
So he knew potentially how far, like maybe not the exact date of where he was, but how far into the future he was traveling.
And he kind of was like scared to stop because he said he might go at such a high velocity he could just explode. And he was like, but at this point I was so sick of the ride I just stopped anyway.
Yeah.
He was like,
right.
Well, he finally mustered the courage to do it.
Right. So like at one point he just decided that he was like he couldn't be scared anymore. If he was going to kill himself, it's going to happen right now. And he just like did it and then threw himself off. But he knew at some point, like it's pretty presumptuous of him. Like he just assumed that the earth wouldn't have been destroyed by something that far in the future. Like I feel like it was dangerous of him to try and travel that far into the future.
Which I guess, nuclear war and stuff, that was still decades off. So that's not something like Wells would be afraid of, but still like a disease or something.
Or a disease or
something.
Well,
he talks about disease later, but
I thought, I was like, I was kind of thinking about like the Prime Directive basically in Star Trek where it's like you don't mess with a natural progression of a society's like culture. So like basically
unless they've achieved space flight.
Yep.
But he like even says in the book that like before he went forward in time, he's like, I just have to do this because it's for science. I'm just gonna do it. And he didn't feel like fear until he actually got in the time machine and started going forward. When he's like, oh my god, I'm actually doing this, there's like real danger.
Which again, I feel like is very intentional for the way his character is written. He seems like the type of person that would be very lighthearted about it.
Yeah.
And then once he's actually in that situation, like, oh no.
He's like, oh my god, I'm actually doing it.
And I might blow up.
Yeah.
But
So another testament to we were recognizing just how impressive it is that Wells was able to predict this imagery that was like that would eventually come into fruition through like cinematography and stuff, with the time travel and visually how that would look. But Faceless Reenactor also says that in other novels of his, he predicted the creation of the atom bomb. And had described what that device would be like.
Yeah, it seems like he's tapping into
He's
that a
really
little bit
intelligent.
here.
Yeah.
What if H.G. Wells is like actually like a time traveler and he just like wrote this down and he was like, "Ha guys, here you go." Like,
It's just his
like
journal.
he just thought it
Man, I don't know, because his view of the future is pretty weird.
It's interesting to see like
it
so a
makes
lot
sense later on when he describes it.
Some of
I
it's
like it.
fairly like kind of accurate depending on from a certain point of view. I guess it's kind of accurate.
Well, what do you guys think about? There's that cliche saying of like, art imitates life or life imitates art. I feel like this is
that.
a really good example of
Life imitating art.
Something my grandma always says is like if it can be perceived, it can be conceived. So like if he's like perceiving this and it's in his own consciousness, like then it can like really happen.
Yeah.
So I always like to think about things like that. So like this might be pseudoscience. However, like there are some things that were thought to be pseudoscience that turned out to be real.
Yeah.
So maybe something like this could actually happen.
Exactly, yeah. Because
Yeah.
I think there's a reason that, and that just gets like really far off into psychology, but like our ability to create or conjure these things in our imagination, I think, are not just random. They can't be. So I think that there's a grain of something inside of all of these different artistic visions.
Yeah.
And that they can't possibly come from nothing, because like what is nothing, anyways.
There's a quote from a play, I can't remember what it is exactly, but it's someone talking about like Don Quixote and saying like, he thought windmills, they might be giants, but of course he was crazy. But then maybe there's a little bit of that in everybody that causes us to like, what if bread mold is actually something that can help people and benefit people and make penicillin,
Right.
And
right.
just if we didn't have this innate thing in us that caused us to wonder what if it might be this, then we would still, I think it says like we'd still be in the tall grass with the apes or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all these assumptions. We make wrong assumptions all
Yeah.
the time that get us closer and closer to things
Yeah.
that will benefit us.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of that in this book. I really like. Honestly, I'm
so cool.
really pleased with the way that this book is going.
Yeah, me too. I really like it.
So he flies off of his time machine
stops.
and stops, and he is in a future where it's pouring hail all around him, and all he can really see and make out is a giant stone figure in front of him,
Like a
which
statue.
It's a sphinx.
pretty
Made of
immediately
marble.
the hail starts to let up a little bit, and he realizes he's surrounded by bushes of flowers, and this figure is a sphinx statue. It's a white sphinx statue with wings outspread, so it just kind of looks like it's hovering there above him,
And at the bottom it's got like bronze.
a bronze base,
Bronze
but the
base
whole
on
thing
it.
is weathered, so he says it gives it like a diseased look. So I feel like his first impression of the future is already kind of a dark one,
Yeah. I
which
think
kind of
that
feeds
he
into
kind
him
of-
thinking of it,
Yeah.
comparing it to like a person who's about to commit suicide, and then the horrible feeling of time traveling, and then he gets to the future and it's like this kind of scary imagery.
And I think that he starts to think that maybe there's not any people around because the statue is neglected and stuff, and he's like, there's trees everywhere.
And all he can
like-
see is like the mist created by the hail around him. And then it slowly starts to clear up. The sun comes out. Oh, I do like that he says like, he talks about how it's a poor welcoming of the future.
Yeah.
That he shows up and
he talks
he's
to the
welcomed.
statue.
Yeah, he's like, some welcome. I traveled like so many thousands of years into the
Yeah.
future, and you welcomed me by soaking me wet with and pouring hail on me and all
Yeah.
this.
Right, it's a terrible
is-
way.
And then,
Which again, I think is his sense of humor coming
Yeah.
through a little bit.
And then right after, these like humanoid creatures kind of emerge.
They're only
Yeah, he
4
notices
feet
there are
tall,
buildings around,
and they're frail.
He sees them through like a round window in one of them. They're looking out at him, and then they all come out to come check him out.
It's so funny because the way he describes them, he's like, I could kick their ass.
Yeah.
He's like, I can take them.
That's one of the first thing he says. I could fling a dozen of them away. And it's like, what are you planning on doing?
But
to
he's
these people?
talking about how like beautiful and graceful they are.
I'm trying
and
to
he's like, but they're
see
so
them.
frail
These are
and
manga
they're so
characters.
small.
Yes.
He describes them almost exactly like manga characters, where they have big eyes, little mouths with red lips, and pointy chins.
Yes.
And they
They're
all
like
look
little-
the same. He said like
They all
the
have
men and
curly
women are like into like
can't tell.
You can't tell them apart.
Yeah.
And they all have their little silk robes.
Yeah,
Very
they're wearing
colorful.
Yeah.
what is
Very-
it? Not a robe, but what is it called?
It's like a tunic.
Are they wearing tunic?
Yeah, it's
tunic
like a skirt
with like a leather
because-
belt
Very colorful
Because he
tunics.
said that
They're
they
like
were all
little
dressed like
and
elves.
that.
sandals, or like the gladiator sandals.
And their
Yeah.
hair was
But
like
they're made of
curly.
metal or
and
something.
it's curly, but he says that there's no hint of any sort of facial hair, and their hair isn't
But
long
why
at all.
are they
It's just like
4 feet tall?
Because
and
he-
like they're
Well,
elves.
he goes
He
into that.
begins to start to theorize that maybe they were like the cause of like eugenics.
Yeah,
Basic-
he really gets into that in the
basically.
4th chapter, though.
Yeah.
In this, they just come out, and that's like the end of the chapter. Is him like he's terrified at first because he's feeling so many different things. Like he wants to explore, but also I just traveled through time. I need to get back in my machine and get back home. And then as they start to come out and come up to him, as soon as he like gets the courage to go back through time, that courage also allows him to say, you know what, I'm gonna stay here and check this
Yeah.
out.
And
Yeah.
So he
and
lets
that's the end
Yeah.
of chapter
he lets
three.
go of
That's
the time
chapter 4.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's really great because the descriptions that they gave too do sound like chibi characters from anime.
They
Yes,
totally do.
they're chibi
That's all I was
characters.
thinking. Is like I can't wait to make this joke whenever we're doing
Right.
this.
So there's like a very I think I have an image here that we can pull up.
Oh, good.
This is a depiction.
Is it just from anime? Just random?
They look actually. I feel like they don't. We'll take a look at it and see. Oh wait, what does it say? Faceless reenactor says that they're like little cherubs. I don't know what cherubs are.
They're
You don't know
angel
what a
babies.
cherub is?
Angel babies?
Like,
Yeah.
you know the
Have
ones
you
that,
ever
yeah.
seen 21 Jump Street where they tell Jonah Hill he looks like a cherub?
Oh, are they what? It's like little cupids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
cherub?
I feel like
My
there's
khaki has
different
a bunch
ideas of what
cherubs
cherub
all over.
I'm
look
glad
like,
that-
just
Yeah.
depending on
Have you seen that movie?
what you've seen.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Sometimes they're like just
He's
beautiful
like,
androgynous
cherub.
men.
Jesus.
Sometimes they're just fat little
I love
babies.
Green.
Yeah. LOL. Okay.
Let's see that
All
picture.
right. So let's see the picture. This is the photo.
they
Or not a
have
photo.
their
They just look
Small.
like children.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
they
They
put the
do.
wreath of flower. This is kind of getting into chapter 4 now.
Yeah. We'll
Okay,
take a look
now
at
I
this.
realize like how bad some of the stuff that he does to them and how confusing it can be to them.
Yeah.
Oh my
Later
god,
So
on.
yeah.
this is just what they
He's
look
like
like.
a giant
We-
man that's like
And, oh yeah, that's the one thing that he said when they approached him. He didn't want to speak in his regular voice because
yeah,
he didn't
he
want to
said
scare
it's too
them.
harsh.
Yeah, so he
harsh
lightened
because
up
they
his
had
voice.
Yes, and he touched his ears and he said he couldn't hear, and then he pointed to the sky, to the sun, and they were like, "Oh, you came from the sun in a thunderstorm."
And he's kind of disappointed. He's just like,
He's
oh.
like,
Yeah.
"Oh."
So okay, so this
But
is
that's-
getting into
yeah.
chapter 4. So
yeah, let's describe
So-
chapter
like-
3.
so
or
we're gonna
summarize.
summarize chapter 3 real quick, just to bookend it. In chapter 3, he tells these people, these esteemed men in his house that have come into the smoke room by now, that after making a last few adjustments to the machine, the time traveler uses his creation to propel himself many years into the future, to the year, Brooke, what year is it?
802,000.
802,701
One.
AD.
Oh yeah,
to be
701.
exact.
He describes
Which
how
is, I'm sorry, which is 800,681 years into the future as of this recording.
yes,
Wow, way
which
to
is
calculate it.
insane.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. So he describes how the scenery changed rapidly around him as he sits in the time machine. He pulls a lever, stopping his fast time travel, and is greeted by a gray sky and hail and clouds, a massive storm, and then a huge sphinx head made of white marble is facing him. He decides to time travel once more, but is stopped when he sees little creatures coming up to him that are very
Little men.
They seem amenable. They seem intrigued by him, and in their faces he perceives no threat and only intrigue, and some nice qualities about them. So in that moment he lets go of the levers, and that is the end of chapter 3. Literally,
Yes.
that's the last thing. That's the last sentence, is that he lets go of the levers, and then begins to interact with these small humanoid creatures.
Yes.
So now we move on to chapter 4.
Who's seen
They have
mostly...
tentacles.
What?
Do they,
They said
actually?
they said then I felt other little soft tentacles on my back and
No,
shoulders, so they
he's
don't
just saying like they're touching his back a
Yeah,
lot.
I
of
don't
it.
think they
during
have
that
They do
part,
not have
I
tentacles.
imagine them like with their little tentacles, and they're like slapping
This
him.
is
with
more like this is more anime than we thought.
Hentai.
Yeah. Now we're getting into something else, I think.
Now we're getting into the good stuff.
The good stuff. But yeah, they are all very tiny, happy little people.
Tiny, happy people.
Tiny, happy people. Tiny,
Yes.
happy. They're shiny too, I guess.
Yeah, they're kind of shiny. They're pretty bright. They're fair, very fair.
And they're all kind of checking him out and stuff, but and yeah, like you said, he tries to communicate with them, but his voice is a little scary to them, so I think he starts gesturing
They
more
also
than he
don't
does.
speak
attempting-
the same language as him.
He
Yeah.
says what their words are. It's like a liquid, like
Very
a sweet
fluid.
sounding language almost.
Mhm.
Like it's very fluid and very simple too.
Yeah, and it sounds like very beautiful to his ears.
Yeah.
Like he is pleased whenever he listens to
And they're
them
very
speak.
childlike. And he was just kind of like, this is what humanity's been reduced to.
When
Yeah,
does he
he
start
was-
He's kind of
talking
like-
Well,
about
at first
like?
he's fairly optimistic about it and
Yeah.
curious. Like he goes back to their house with them, or the
At
giant building that
palace.
they live in.
He first tries to
Yeah.
communicate with them as soon as he gets off of the time machine and like prevents them from messing with it.
Oh, that's
They
funny.
mess with the
I love
levers.
that they try to mess with
Oh,
it,
oh,
and
this
he's
is-
just like yells at him a little bit and
This
scares
is
them away,
super
and then he
important.
unscrews the
Yeah, he
levers
takes
and
the
puts them in
lever
his
off.
pocket.
Yeah.
So he takes the lever off and he puts it in his pocket. So like we know that nobody else can use it.
Yes.
It has to be there.
I would be
It's gonna
terrified
say-
of leaving my time machine unattended if I
Yeah.
were someone traveling that
Yeah.
far into the future that I'm not sure I want to get stuck in.
Well, yeah, because that's
Yeah.
one thing that he was concerned about. He was like, what if they're savages? What if this is like a really cruel place to live?
And they
I
do
think
seem
after
friendly,
he
but
said
still,
that he
like,
can like
they could
beat
break
up
it.
8 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Well, I'm
Um,
keeping an open mind about like what could potentially be in this world, right? Because like these seem to be like creatures that are low on the run.
Well, you
for like
you get that
predatory-
Yeah,
later
what if some
in
giant-
chapter 5. The other.
Well, we're not covering
creatures are
chapter
there.
5, Brooke.
Oh, man.
wait, I thought we
read
were
to
doing
chapter
chapter
5.
No, we
Five.
just
Chapter
doing
4.
through chapter 4.
Through chapter 4.
I
Because there are
thought
12
Alexander
chapters in the
said we were
book, so we do
doing-
4 per week.
Oh, good, because chapter 5,
This is too much.
it's a
So-
blur.
Because there's 12 chapters.
Oh, I thought we were
So-
reading
Yeah,
chapter
so we're doing
5,
4
so
per
I
week,
read it.
3 weeks in a row.
Okay,
and
Oh
then-
man, then
It'll be even.
Yeah,
So
we're
we'll figure it
gonna
out.
go
But
man.
yeah, so I'm keeping
I
an open
thought
mind about like
Alexander
what's
said
in
we were
here
supposed to
because I
read
feel like
5.
these little creatures
He
are not
did.
the apex predators of
It's
the world.
their problem.
Yeah, and he kind of alludes to that a little bit a couple times where his predictions of what is going on in the world are eventually going to turn out to be way wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's,
He hints at it a couple times in this
he's
chapter.
disappointed almost immediately with them. Riley's mentioned it earlier that he attempted to like communicate with them and explained that he couldn't hear what they were saying, and then he tried to describe where he came from.
And they kind of laugh about it and they're entertained for a moment, but then they lose interest in him so quickly.
yeah.
And he's
You know
just
what?
like, there's no, like, as a scientist, as like someone who's an
Is it in
inventor,
chapter
he's
5?
like, people
No.
are just losing their curiosity in the future. This is a really sad development
You know
for
what
this
their
guy.
language could be like?
What?
You know those tiny little things off of Star Wars that just like steal everything? And they're like,
Those-
Yes.
Oh,
like,
Jawas.
what are they?
The
Yeah,
Jawas.
Jawas. They're like,
ooh, TD!
Um,
talking
we
to each
figured
other.
it out. They're Jawas.
So
Jawas, yeah.
he refers to it as contented inactivity when he really starts getting into
Yeah,
his
he's kind of
guess at
analyzing
what's
them.
happened to humanity.
When does he
and-
talk? He talks about that at the
There's-
end of the chapter, right? His
yeah,
like
before that he goes with them
idea
back
of-
to their palace and
Yeah.
they all sit down to have meals. They sit at a giant like marble table in this big room, and he's noticing around the room that a lot of things are just not kept very well, that there are curtains covered in dust. stained glass windows that are shattered in multiple places,
Yeah,
and
they're kind
the
of
tables
eating.
are chipped, the marble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he watches them eat, and they just kind of are like, they have all this fruit, which they have.
Which
they're
everybody,
eating with
I was going to say
abandon.
everybody in the future is a vegetarian, which I feel like
Well,
that's,
because animals are extinct.
we're
Yeah.
moving more and more that direction all
He-
the time. So that's kind of
He said he found out that just
another great
cows and
prediction.
everything.
Well, I think it was
Dogs,
interesting because
horses, like animals are all extinct.
Yeah.
So they can't
he hasn't
eat
described a single animal in this chapter.
yeah,
that
we haven't
has-
seen.
that
He hasn't
exists.
seen anything, so
Sorry.
it's making me, it's making me like question, like, are there predators there? Like, what's going on with
Well,
that?
I
Because-
think he says that he theorizes that the animals are gone,
Yeah.
that there aren't any, and that's why they're eating just fruit because they don't even have the option.
And he even says like
Oh my god.
he even says
You
like
ripped me
time
off.
traveling has kind of made him a little bit hungry, and that he's hungry for
Yeah, but I
like
like chapter one.
Some mutton.
yeah, he says something. He's got some mutton.
Yeah.
He says he's got like some carnivorous like impulses,
Yeah.
but he'll settle for the fruit that they're eating. And then they just take the peels and stuff and put it in a hole that's in the table,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
think is an interesting like
Something probably is
They
developed.
idea of a
said that they
systems.
were kind of flinging peels and stalks, so forth, into round openings into the sides of the tables.
Yeah. I
So-
feel like there's some
Just
small
like some
animal.
some chute that it goes down.
And
Yeah,
then-
I forget. There's like some older cartoon that maybe
Ooh.
has like a device. Maybe
Riley.
it was something like the Flintstones. That they have
Probably.
little
I think I
animals.
know
that
Some
do
why they're
dinosaur
throwing
eating it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
yeah, exactly.
They always had like some
Yes.
sassy
Oh, I wish I
response to
could
their
talk
job
about that.
in the
important. I
future.
wish I could talk about it too, but we'll
No,
talk
we
about
know
it
the
later.
reason why they're
We know why
throwing
they're
it
doing
down,
it.
but
know
we
why
can't
they're
talk
doing it.
about that yet.
Well, I've read the book
Man.
before, so I also know the reason. But
Okay.
I think
So
I'm the only
Maverick
person who's
is
read
in
this
the-
book, right?
Yeah, I think
guess.
you're the only person.
So
I haven't
Maverick
read
is
it.
in the dark about why they're throwing it down there.
Okay, so there's a part where he's talking about how they all live together. So it says basically looking around that there aren't he
No more like
he's
households.
exploring, and so there's no more households, like, and there aren't little houses like the ones we see in England.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden
No
our
farms.
nothing. He said that it's just all torn down, and all of a sudden the narrator says to himself, he says, "Communism."
I know,
Myself.
which is such a like
Yeah, it's so
of the
good.
time thought
Yeah.
to have. But
He's just like,
And it's honestly just so
communism.
funny too, because he's
And
so
that's-
serious in that
Yeah.
moment. Like he's looking around and he's just so
Right.
puzzled. He can't understand where are all the individual homes. Why are they all looking the same?
Right.
What is this? Why is it so communal? They live in
communism.
Communism.
the red menace, the red scare.
Oh,
And
that
let
red
me get you
menace.
let's get this straight. I'm a self-professed anti-communist, so I think this is hilarious. Like it's really funny.
And I don't know if he's saying
So-
like communism, like he's upset about it, or he's like communism.
That's
Like,
the
see?
answer.
A couple things that I just realized I forgot to mention. In chapter 2, that's like the first real instance that the narrator is omitting the time traveler's name. He has like a long
he has
line
a long dash.
and says, "I said," using his name or something. But
Yeah.
it's clear. I'm imagining like Kill Bill, where they bleep out Beatrix Kiddo's name whenever it's
Yes.
said
yes.
for whatever reason. The chapter Kill Bill Part 1, Volume 1. And then also at the beginning of this chapter, they put like a garland of flowers around his neck, which was what we
Which-
saw in the image. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they kept putting flowers.
And these are
on
the
him.
big
And
grand
they keep following
really
him
like
everywhere.
I
flower
can't even
garlands.
talk about like
the
really cool-
grandeur of the structures
Man.
is massive.
So bad.
Yeah, all
Um,
these like palaces and
they're huge and they're largely unused. I feel like most of them.
yeah, when he
Again, he notices that there are like major signs of abandonment or neglect in the structures, that they had been chipped on the corners, and that there were all
Yeah.
kinds of different.
I didn't envision like this. I envisioned like a jungle. There's like crazy overgrowth, and then they have these like white marble palaces.
yeah.
But like the houses that are in that picture, I didn't see houses like
yeah,
that.
he
'Cause
does
it
kind of
looks like he's in
describe
a garden.
what do you call it on the top of buildings
Oh,
on the
there's no
roof
weeds.
there's like a rail around roofs.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
What do you call that?
Uh,
Where like a small fence, to protect people
Yeah.
around the edge of a building, and how they can be ornate sometimes.
Yeah, just
he
a
does
guardrail.
describe
Guardrail.
that.
He said there's like ornate carvings, but he doesn't think that the little people did that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's very
Well, he's
like
even wondering how they like
And he-
get their clothes
Yeah.
and their shoes and stuff.
And he said it was like a really unattended garden, but he said it was like it was a garden without weeds. Like there were no weeds there. Like nothing that would cut you. He even talks about later on about nettles. It was like there were nettles, but they wouldn't sting you.
So no creepers.
No
to
creepers.
Get caught up and
Nothing
cut
to
up.
cut.
with.
Yes.
I need
So-
the
Shout out
creepers.
to Lord of the Flies.
It was like very idyllic. So like he's got basically this like idyllic little garden.
Yeah,
So,
he starts walking off by himself, and he eventually starts walking up a hill where he can overlook the entire surroundings. And it's funny because they get tired out walking after him because they're just so like they're in the kind of a default stage of not needing to use any energy for anything. So these little 4 feet tall people are just like, whatever. They stop following him. They lose interest, and he is able to go up by himself and sit down on this bench, which is like made of some yellow metal that he doesn't recognize that rusts pink, which is a
yeah.
very interesting. And then the armrests of it look like griffin heads.
Mhm.
That's
And he just sits there on this hill and overlooks the entire place. He sees palaces, other like sphinx-like white statues dotting the land. But yeah, no homes, no individual homes. Everybody lives together in these big,
Yeah.
ornate buildings, and everybody just kind of seems to be. He also like recognizes that even art and things like
Yeah.
that, there's like apart from like the
The
garland of
flowers,
flowers, there's
That's
no
just
art.
not artistic that they have gotten. So that's why he's like pretty like, oh,
No.
there's nothing about you.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, it's
he-
all just kind of.
that's why
He's
he
like,
assumed
man,
it
this
was
is kind of a
communism."
shame
Yeah.
that
So
nobody.
he
He says like, now that they've reached this perfect future where everything's been genetically modified, like there's no disease that he can see, no weeds, no anything negative really.
Yeah.
It's caused people to kind of revert to this a little bit too relaxed stage of like not really thinking or caring, no curiosity, no artistic impulses,
Yeah.
no
They
anything.
just bathe and
Yeah.
play
and do whatever
and
they
eat,
want all
yeah.
day long.
Well,
Just
that's
do
what
whatever, yeah.
Faceless Reenactor put a message in the chat saying it's a garden of Eden of sorts.
That's what I was trying to
Yeah,
say
very
earlier.
much.
So, if we can juxtapose it to the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
like a return to the garden, which is actually biblical. So it talks about like even in like the later like books of the Bible where it talks about the second coming of Eden. So coming back to the garden like after, whatever people perceive to be the apocalypse happening. So a return to simplicity and a return to like purity. So like these kids like are the children are without sin technically. They're children.
They're children, yeah.
They're children, so they're playing and they're living like this like kind of sin-free life.
Yeah.
They're not sexual. They're not like
Well,
I mean,
he said
and
they
they
do
could
make
be
love,
They're not
but it's
throwing
fun.
rocks down
yeah,
onto
but it's
anybody's
fun.
head.
It's not like perverted.
He does kind of like parts of this idea of the future are pretty progressive, even by today's standards, where like we talked about a little bit before, the men and women have both like they both kind of look the same now. They both have very soft features. I guess more than anything, men have become very feminine.
Yeah.
But it's
And they have a small
there's no
population.
need for
Yeah.
these gendered roles because families don't exist anymore
He does say
and
that
war and stuff
explicitly,
doesn't
yeah.
exist anymore, so you don't need masculinity and all these things that on the surface do seem like such a great
Yeah.
idealistic idea. So there's no more division amongst
Yeah.
people.
But
Yeah.
he said that the reason that happened, or he theorizes that the reason that there is no, that they had grown so close together now in physical appearance and in behavioral tendencies is because there was no need, there was no
Yeah.
task
Yeah.
to set
Yeah.
either gender
And that's
to.
like the big
Yeah.
shame of this future.
Yeah, there was
that
no
he
need to
thinks
even have
is
children.
that there's
Yeah.
no purpose for anything anymore.
I
So
really
that-
like the paragraph where he's theorizing about that, and he's saying since there is no war and
Yeah.
no conflict, they don't need to be intellectual. They don't need to do all this stuff because
Yeah.
society is this certain way.
Yeah.
So they don't need characteristics
And-
that we deem necessary now.
Yeah. And he's really trying to theorize it, and he kind of states it, and he's like, I don't know if it's true, but here's what I think is why they're that way. So he keeps saying it over and over again, like, I didn't know if it was true, but that was my theory. So he's kind of
I think
thinking that they were a product of, like, a utopia society, and so, like, that's how that they ended up being there.
I mean, it's fairly short, but he says, even this artistic impetus?
Impetus,
Would at last die away, had almost died in the time I saw, to adorn themselves with flowers, to dance, to sing in the sunlight. So much was left of the artistic spirit, and no more. Even that would fade in the end into a contented inactivity. Were kept keen in the grindstone of pain and necessity, and it seemed to me that here was that hateful grindstone broken at last. And then, like, the very last of the 4th chapter, as I stood there in the gathering dark, I thought that in this simple explanation I had mastered the problem of the world, mastered the whole secret of these delicious people. Possibly the checks that they had devised for the increase of population had succeeded too well, and their numbers had rather diminished than kept stationary. That would account for the abandoned ruins. Very simple was my explanation, and plausible enough, as most wrong theories are. Yeah. Which I think is such a... That ending of that chapter, when I first read this book, really stuck with me. It's just like... I just think it's such a solid ending to a chapter.
It's a great attitude to have, because it's just like... a lot of people, like all of the prominent men, the educated men, or the men of like academia or whatever it was that he had in his home, were all so sure of, you know, the fact that time travel is impossible, and that all of these different concepts that they had been taught in school were correct, and they sounded plausible, right? And they all sounded like they were right, but then, as far as the story goes, of course, they were wrong.
Yeah, it's nice that he's admitting to that too. Like, I thought I really had it figured out, but I didn't. And it's a nice way to leave off to leading into, like, next week. You know, it's like, okay, whatever he's perceiving about these people and their idealistic, utopian, simple life is totally wrong. There's something else going on here.
Yeah. And he, like, I think he also points out, like, he seems, the book seems to make him very disappointed about, like, the status of everything, because
and he said that he happened upon humanity at a wane, so, like, humanity's dying out. So he just knows that, like, the end is near for them.
Even so, I think, and not just specifically that, like, humanity itself, but, like, the purpose of living is at a wane more than anything. Just the, like, they're not living for anything. There's
the drive.
Nothing exciting is happening in this time period. It's all just a little too
That was
simple.
what I got out of that whole portion. This entire chapter was basically just saying that if there's nothing to work toward, if there's no opposition, if there's no pain or suffering or disease, or because this entire thing is just they've been able to flawlessly separate themselves from nature. Right? There's nothing, because ultimately nature is what propels all of us to strive for more, or to just continue to endure things. And so when you live in a utopia, well, there's nature is gone now. Our connection with nature is vapid. We have no hold on it anymore. There's nothing that's oppressing us, no disease, no animals that are hunting, there's no anything. And so now that seems to me connected with another idea of unfreedom, which is that creativity thrives under constraints. So if you just give everyone everything, like, and the decisions say, what would you like to do? And they freeze and they can't decide what they want to do. And so I think that's a similar thing, is that there has to be constraints on existence in order to give it meaning.
Yeah, they're to have purpose in life.
Right.
You have to have something to overcome, or some challenge or something.
Yeah, like maybe the existence for Sisyphus isn't that bad, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's better than these little small, you know, cherub-like characters. Is that maybe it would be better to push a rock up the hill forever than to have no purpose at all.
Yeah.
You know? So that was an interesting chapter for me.
Yeah.
Just wait until next time. It is like a rocket launch.
The flowers he describes are rhododendrons.
Rhododendrons?
Yeah,
I think that's how you say that.
We have them all around. They're, like, really, like...
And they are beautiful. They're huge flowers all over these bushes. And anyway,
so
it's like a transformer more than a flower.
I like it. I like how at the beginning of the chapter he's sitting
Rhododendron.
I summon you, rhododendron. Yeah. So I'm like really content with the place that we're at right now in the book. Like I feel like this has been like a really good experience. Like reading these chapters, I sped through them. I read this whole thing in a day.
Yeah, I was gonna say just today I read all this. I was planning on reading it over the past few days, but I had stuff come up that I couldn't do it. And
Yeah, very easily. I mean, it wasn't a
like,
stress at all.
Yeah,
It's
I
an
finished it as
easy
I got
read.
here. I mean, actually, as I was sitting here before we started recording, I
Finished
was
it?
like, okay, I do need to figure out how this chapter ends off. Yeah.
So, it's a really easy read. I panic read it today, Spedden says. Spaden. Oh, you silly. Yeah. There was a few people who were messaging me, too, about the book club today that I think are watching right now. Faceless, you call me a fool? I'll end you, boy. So, yeah, I feel like this is a really easy read and a good one, too. It's not just like a simple read. It's thrilling.
It's complex.
It's complex. It has like so many turns of like new things that
it has a lot of euphemisms too, so like I'm pretty sure that like everything he's writing about has like a double meaning like when we're reading it. So
and I guess like I've read this book before in the past, and it is like my favorite book. It's the perfect length for someone like me that doesn't love reading typically, which is, I mean, I do love the Fall Book Club because of that it makes me like have to read more, because I do believe reading is a great thing that everybody should do.
Yeah.
It's just in our age of being distracted by
TikTok.
media in general, TikTok. It's nice to be forced sort of by obligation to return to reading and actually like get something you do. It's like it's a thing like exercising. Seems like such a pain in the butt, but once you sit down and you actually do it, but once you actually do it, it's something that you realize is very beneficial for you and good. And that's kind of what this is.
Yeah,
It's
and
just
that's
like,
why we always vet these books really well. We don't have any options that we pull from the hat that are going to be like dubious picks.
yeah,
They're never books that are like maybe they'll be a waste of time, because they're, rest assured, like I feel like a lot of people that maybe aren't like huge readers don't realize, but the number of books in the world that are total trash, they're like, that's like 85%.
shout out to Twilight.
Well, like I mean, that's a good story. I like that story,
It's
but like
a good
don't ever,
story.
Don't step to Maverick about
But-
Twilight. He really
Thanks,
likes
Maverick.
it.
Thank you, Maverick.
I got you on that one. But there's a huge portion of literature that's just absolutely terrible.
Yes.
And it's just blatant propaganda as well. And so it's good to read classical literature that endures time, that is timeless, that has like elements inside of it that are brilliant, and we can pull so many things. We were talking about it the other day at the coffee shop, that reading all of these classic books feels great because all of these different elements and these tropes or cliches were originated in these classical pieces of literature, and we can see them now echoed and copied and
Or,
inspired in like film now.
There are books now that might be considered very popular or amazing, but they won't stand the test of time. So it's kind of cool to read books that have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And what I was saying before too is that like, it's something when you like reread a book where you kind of discover new aspects of it before. And one of the big things that I guess I'm discovering this time is that before it seemed very much like the narrator was just giving a pretty straight account of what happened. And I feel like this time I can see more of the time traveler's humorous side coming through, like through his musings and everything.
Yeah, at the beginning of chapter 4, he's like, "This is all gonna sound like lies, but I'm telling you, it's the truth.
Yeah,
It
or when
actually
when he
happened."
sits down and like they talk about how he looks completely changed. Like he shows up and he looks completely disheveled and cut up and covered in stains and everything, and he goes and washes up, and then he comes back to talk with them. And they say like they can see him smiling a little bit, that like flashes of his smile that look more familiar coming across his face. So I get more of a sense this time around that this is a guy who has like a nice sense of humor, or at least is like an easygoing person, despite being this really brilliant inventor
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's the best version of an intellectual I think that you could try and conceive of.
Yeah.
Is that he is extremely high in openness because he was able to try and pioneer an area in science that had never been done before and thought of as like magic or like ludicrous ideas such as time travel.
What is his housekeeper's name? Does
Mrs.
anybody?
Something, I don't know.
Mrs. Something.
He said he saw her like
He
flash
briefly
across the room,
sees
and
her.
he's
Yeah,
like,
she shoots like a rocket across
Oh
the room
yeah.
because he's time traveling. That
Yeah.
she passes
He was-
through.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, aside from like Piggy's auntie in the last book, that's like the first mention of a woman that we've had in
Right.
these stories. It's so far the
Oh,
story is very
so
much like a
far.
sausage fest.
Yeah.
But it does become
well,
less
we have
so.
we have the little cherub women.
they're
Yeah.
not women. They're like, I mean, they're women and men, but he can't tell the difference so far.
Yes,
Yeah,
but he
so
does.
So
Well,
far.
maybe there will be more of a female presence coming up.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who
Maybe.
knows?
Maybe.
He gets he
A love
has
interest.
a gender reassignment surgery in the future.
Yeah, he
No.
is the woman.
This
in
is more
one.
progressive than we had thought.
Well, I say.
I do say. Gosh, terrible.
So, do we have a summary for chapter 4?
We do have a summary for chapter 4, so we'll bookend it real quick. In chapter 4, the small humanoid creatures investigate him, fascinated by him and his machine. They attempt to communicate with him, with one another, but they can't. They take him back to a large structure to eat nothing but fruit because they appear to be vegetarian. And a note on that. I think the reason that they're eating nothing but fruit is because fruit, out of all of the different like vegetable type thing, not vegetables, but like plant-based materials you could eat, it's the closest to candy as you can get.
Ooh, good,
Ooh,
Right.
Maybe.
good
So-
observation.
So and all of their different he describes them multiple times as being like immature children, and that's why they have a lack of interest, a lack of duration and interest. They can't focus for long.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that someone who eats only fruit is a vegetarian.
Right.
I
don't
think
know
that's
that
just
there's not a
his-
term for like eating fruit as well.
Fruitarian.
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 That's real.
Right. So
The fruitarian.
I'd never thought of that before.
right, because I don't know. I think they're all I don't
You
know.
should
But-
not only eat fruit. It's bad for you. Don't do
Yeah,
that.
because
Probably.
it's so sugary. That's
It
why
has no protein, like little to no protein.
Also, acid reflux.
Yeah.
You
need
will-
that
For some of
HCl.
us.
Take some
You'll
HCl
poop
pills.
water for days, years.
So
Like,
that was an
straight.
interesting thing that I thought about is that fruit's basically sugar. Like it's not like if you're going on a diet
Yeah.
and you want to lose weight and you think that fruit is a good thing to eat, it's not.
You can't
It's-
eat.
He
most
does talk
fruit.
about
Yeah.
like, I mean, I don't think the term existed yet, but he does talk about like genetically modifying fruits
Right.
to be more to serve humanity better.
Right.
Basically.
Oh, he
said
Slice-
there
So
was,
maybe
like-
in the future this
He
fruit
predicted
has more.
GMOs.
Yeah,
I
he
would
said
think
he
has
was
more of what
talking
we
about
need.
like seedless grapes and like how the oranges were like bigger
Yeah.
and there
Yeah.
were like oranges and like some semblance of a raspberry or something like that that he
yeah.
saw.
And there were so many fruits he didn't recognize as well.
he said he took a liking to this weird one.
Yeah.
That had like a husk on it.
big
It had-
husk. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that the fruit had evolved to the point where they maybe bred them at some point. The society did to where they yielded more fruit. Because evolutionarily speaking, fruit is a new development biologically, like by however many eons. But that's pretty new. Usually, like they start out with ferns, and then most of the different fruit yielding stuff. Even when we see the genetically modified fruit that we have, like bananas, are not. Were originally just a couple hundred years ago, not like the size that we have them now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Same with apples. The
Carrots
apples were barely
weren't
edible.
orange like they
Yeah.
are now. Everything has changed a lot.
And it's also notable
have
to
the
say that
Seedless watermelons now.
that I think that there's a correlation, and maybe some causation between fruit plants, the abundance and survival of fruit plants, and their predators or the things that devour them. So the less competitive the plant environment is, the more fruits will thrive because they don't. Because plants, those fruit-bearing plants don't have major mechanism to defend themselves. So like creepers, they would be like really invasive, different biological entities that would go in and like spread themselves everywhere, because they're basically just a defense vessel. They defend themselves first and foremost, and that's how they spread their seed and everything. But fruits don't. They just sit there.
Creepers love spreading their seed.
Yeah.
Well, fruit.
That's what I love.
Well, fruit like
Man, creepers
like
need to start
technically, if you think
stop
about fruit,
spreading
like
this,
fruit wants
That's
to
what
be
makes them
eaten.
so creepy.
Like fruit. Guys, this is so important.
Sorry.
This is important. This is important.
All
to
right,
train
all
a
right. Let's
thought
listen
I
to what
have.
Riley's saying.
Okay, fruit is important. Like you like a plant like would want a lot of fruit if it was a fruit bearing thing, because when you eat it, that means that like the animal is gonna poop out your seeds and you will eventually like reproduce and like grow. So basically the flower, the blossom, like that's the reproduction zone for like trees, and like that's how they're going to go other places. So it is important. Like,
right,
I mean,
because
all
they
this
can't
fruit,
spread
yeah.
as far.
They
don't
can't
have
spread as
means
far.
to do it.
Yeah.
So they rely on other
They rely
things
on other people to eat their fruit.
to devour them to a point where they can be spread other places. But be careful. I don't know all of this for sure. I could be totally wrong about any of this. I got a 70 on my biology 2 exam today.
All this is just kind of making me think about how
Not an expert.
Not an expert.
it's just making me think about how we have like. Listen, I eat meat. I love a good steak, chicken. I love it.
I'm
I
on
had
the verge
Popeyes
of
today,
carnivore.
but
Just
I
carnivore.
do recognize the benefits of just being a vegetarian and how that's probably like the way most people should go if we weren't so used to eating the
Man,
meats that we
meat's
eat.
just so
And-
good.
But it's funny to
Yeah.
think that we like raise cattle and stuff and we feed them plants so that we can eat the cattle eventually,
And get
rather
actually-
than just like
and get
we
the
could just
plants.
eat
Get a much
plants.
smaller yield versus
Right.
the amount
Yeah.
of
Well,
we
things
feed-
that you put
It's like an
into cows.
industry that's kept going for no reason other than like there are people that have money invested in it.
Well, also to be clear, though.
Anyway,
we
not
feed-
to get too
we
political on our
we get
fall book club.
Ooh,
to be
That's
clear
such a
though,
hot
we
topic.
feed
I know.
we feed cattle grain because it fattens them.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's something we should be eating.
I mean, I'm
It's
not
nothing
saying like
but
I mean,
sugar basically.
okay,
It's just
we
like
also-
direct.
it's just like it's a whole industry that's kept going kind of unnecessarily, but also
Yeah.
we live in Texas and that's like a huge people have their
That's our
livelihood
economy.
invested in that. So
that is Texas's
I
economy,
mean,
basically.
I think it's okay to
Yeah, I
recognize
mean-
that it's flawed
Yeah.
while also recognizing that that's just how things are.
I love meat. I think
Man,
it's
and
great.
the
If
beef
you-
is better
if
in
you have-
Texas.
If you have a lack of, here's a cool thing. If you have a lack of HCl in your stomach, which is the hydrochloric acid that breaks down the
I
food
have
in your
acid
stomach.
reflux. Like
Okay.
that's not gonna help me at all.
I have
It
acid
will.
reflux too, big time.
Yes. So I've explained this to both of you before.
Yeah,
I
haven't
think you have. I've still got a
Yes.
tab open on my phone from something you suggested to me.
Equal Example
months
says
ago.
it would be a tough industry to just stop. What would you do with all the animals? Question mark.
True, there's a lot
like,
that they've bred.
We breed them though. We
Okay.
increase their population, so
Yeah,
we could let
so
that
we
decrease
could let it die
naturally.
down. And also, if you think about one cow, we use a massive amount of resources to feed and breed and make animals. So we use a ton of resources, more than it would take to like grow like
Yeah, we're
field
very
of
actively
soybeans
keeping
or-
this industry going
So we use a ton and
to serve humanity.
so think about all the resources used to make one cow, and the yield from that cow does not equate the amount of resources that it uses. So it's actually, there's a lot of environmental damage that cows like at feed yards do, like everything that we have. They cause asthma, so much other stuff. This is actually a Texas fact. So we
Texas fun fact.
they use
Should
90
have like an alert.
we use
I know.
97%
That's exactly
of
what I
our
was
water
thinking.
resources
This fact.
on the Ogallala Aquifer, like everything that we have, Amarillo's water. We use 97% of the Panhandle's water for agriculture and only 3% for human use.
Damn.
I'm down for
So
it.
when we dry
I'm down
That's a
up,
lot
for
of
those
water.
cows.
When
You
we-
can't destroy water.
no, we can run out and become a desert. Like, I'm not even joking.
Yes, but what I'm telling you is
It'll
that
happen here.
it goes somewhere else. Like the water, you can't destroy matter.
Well, because water also
Water will run out.
recycles.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It just goes into
in
the water cycle.
The cycle.
Into the ocean.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
but it's
oh,
not like
oh.
we're. It's just.
Also-
I mean,
Normally, when I'm done with it, I'll just like pee it out.
yeah, like I.
Pee it out.
No, also
Like, I
that
don't-
matter can turn into different forms of matter that's not like we can't consume.
But I don't see an issue with that. Like
No,
they're like,
well, like-
oh,
We
eventually
can run
we're gonna
out of
destroy...
water.
Yeah, but they're like, eventually we're going to destroy the earth and there'll be no resources.
We
I'm
will
like, what's
have-
the problem with that?
Guys, in 30
Like, we
years
should
we will have
restart
a
at
water
some
crisis. Like we just turn on the tap, whatever. In 30 years we will have a world water crisis.
Like, I think we're being real.
It's
selfish.
already
But
happening
I
in-
trust
We
our
should
government
restart
will
at some
take care of it
point. Like-
properly.
Should we
Let's
not
just-
hit the reset at some point? Like, let's just take it all down down to zero. Let's just let it all
you know
run
what
out.
we should do? Just
Oh,
do a
no.
bunch of H bombs because those make like a ton of water. If you didn't know, we could take that radioactive water for a
This
second.
book club has gotten so dark suddenly.
Anyway,
Yeah, it
so
turned into different.
But
well, I think we're still slightly on topic.
No,
'cause
yeah,
these are
yeah.
all relevant.
Yeah.
Subjects
yeah, I mean,
to
he's
the
bringing
book.
up
So in the
ideas of the
future.
future, and we're
Yeah.
talking
We
about
think
like
about
potential
our
futures.
We're on
Right.
topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. We were talking about like the meat, the cattle industry, and all
The
that.
Texas fact.
And yeah, I don't have anything more to say.
Man,
about that.
There's no more about
Guys,
it.
watch Forks Over Knives. Watch Cowspiracy. Do some research.
Cowspiracy.
Cowspiracy.
Here's the deal.
Cowspiracy, like, literally.
Already the
can
credibility of that has taken a hit
Let's
just on the
just say,
title
Riley-
alone.
Cows- Riley
Cowspiracy is
said-
pretty cool.
Riley tried to make an argument that it takes like a ridiculous amount of resources to continue and propagate agriculture for like say cattle and the meat industry, and that we should grow soybeans instead. But let me tell you what, eating beef never gave anyone boobs. Okay, so
What?
I'm
Whoa.
just saying.
Oh,
that-
so soybeans.
I'm pretty sure that's
I'm
based
say-
on a total misconception of how that works. But
But
that's
I will
okay.
say,
No,
I
it's
will
true.
say that
I
beef-
only eat soybeans.
yeah.
Well, think about like how much money we spend in making like beef and cattle, but we still have kids that like have poverty and like don't eat like meals like during the day, when we could be making we could be growing a ton of like vegetables or things that have protein in them and be
Oh, I mean, you
creating
think about-
cheap meals
we've
for
got
people
like
who have
entire industries dedicated to entertaining people, which all that money
bread
could
and
go
circuses,
towards
bud.
feeding all of the people of the world that need food.
Right.
True.
But
Yeah. Well,
Right.
All
We
these
could just say
unfortunately,
that-
a big
think about all these
reality of
entertainments
life
and-
is just wanting
yeah.
to be entertained. So
It's
Exactly.
just
There's, like,
unemployed
some
one
distraction.
actor and they can feed everyone.
Right, you could take any portion of the world that has like any economic system that has like money flowing through it and be like, yeah, I don't think, in my opinion, that shouldn't be. We should just move that money somewhere else. Like,
Yeah.
you can say
Yeah.
that about anything.
I mean, there's a website about like, has Jeff Bezos solved world hunger yet? And it's just every day it's nope.
Yeah.
Man, he literally could, and
He
he
could.
wouldn't even spend.
Well,
he probably
here's-
spend like 2%.
Here's
Oh,
the question
here's
for
the
that.
thing.
Here's a question. This is relative to the book. That world hunger is solved for the little cherub people. They don't seem to be
Little
starving.
cherub
There's no
people.
disea's
They do
plaguing
get a
them.
name.
Yeah. What are they? What's
They
their
do.
name?
Eventually they will.
Oh, okay,
They
they
will.
But it's not
we
yet.
Can't, we
Okay.
can't say it yet.
So
No
the little
spoilers.
cherub creatures aren't starving and they're fine, but they seem to be like very low level
You don't.
creatures.
First of all, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I read the 5th chapter.
I know. but
So
we're talking
wait.
about the
Next
fourth
week
chapter.
we are reading 5, 6,
So-
7, and 8.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yes.
So, however, we can't.
Was that no?
World hunger should be solved.
Yeah, just to make sure everybody knew to stop
Well,
at chapter
I don't think
8.
that people would stop working
Stop
hard if
after
everybody
reading
was
chapter
starving.
8.
Man.
Like everybody wasn't starving. That doesn't. Okay, I don't think people would become lazy if like we actually had like everybody had some economic stability and could feed themselves properly.
I think
Probably not. But
Yeah.
we could definitely use more stability
Oh,
nowadays.
guys, I'm such a radical socialist. Like y'all don't even know. Like I'm like over here. Like I've got so many crazy like ideas.
So here's a question. Equal Example says, curious though, and this might sound a bit dark, but if we ended world hunger, what would we do about world population?
Okay, I've got a
That's
thing
true.
about that. Okay, guys. So this is what you do.
Start with the virus.
If you
Coronavirus
Way ahead of you.
conspiracy.
this is like my world. Like me and my friend was talking about it, and I was like, this is a really good idea. Okay, so in a perfect world, you want a child, and you have to sign like this like application, and you go through like this year's like course on how to be a parent. You have to apply, and you get one child. If you fail the course like more than once, like you're done. Like you can't have
Okay,
kids. Boom,
China.
they
Oh my
they
God.
sterilize you, and you get one kid. That's all you get,
That's
and you have to take
literally-
a class, and you cherish that child forever.
That's
because-
literally China. China
Do
has
you
a
see-
children limit.
Do-
Riley's
can you
first language
blame
is
them?
German, if
Do you
anyone was
do you-
wondering.
Do you see? Do you see how many people there are in China? Like just walking. Like, have you seen the
and that's
clip
with
of
a
Dwight from the?
population limit. That's with a kid
I'm wondering how many
limit.
people are watching this thinking this is just the most ignorant
No,
Have
there's
you
at
seen-
least
book
one.
club I've ever been
Yeah,
a part
we're
of.
an
Equal
expert
Example
on everything.
says that's a fine and dandy plan if you are okay with taking everyone's freedoms away.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just
Well, I mean, you're just so close to like
How much do personal freedoms infringe on other people's like being able to like live a normal life?
Yeah. I don't know
So
though
many,
because
you lose personal freedoms when you go into certain areas like school. You lose personal freedoms. Like I mean, even in America,
Yeah.
we don't have every
I
personal
don't
freedom
think
that
we
we
should
could
take
have.
people's freedoms away to like decide if they want to have a kid. But I actually saw a statistic that was like our generation in general is less likely to have kids now anyway.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have countries already that are having issues meeting their replacement rates, which is a huge problem for all of their work environments. Their trades establishments are having trouble putting people in there, not because there isn't a demand or a drive to like move younger men and women into those fields, but because there aren't younger men and women to move into them. So it becomes a huge issue if our countries stop meeting their replacement
Well,
rates.
even like there are countries that are largely just like middle-aged to older people. Like there aren't a lot of younger people
Yeah.
living there because like I can't remember why it is. I think their like birth rate is really low.
I think if there's anything to be learned from this, it's that 7 billion plus people are extremely hard to manage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's true. And
That's why we need one world government.
and if you're out there to do just to throw
Star
out
Trek.
a Jordan Peterson-ism that if you think that you can correct the flaws and errors in government and in the economy, but you can't keep your room clean, you're wrong.
Man, me.
You're
My
wrong.
room is so tidy though.
Like I just
So
I,
you
I
should be
love
in
that. So all
I'll
right,
be
we're
in
gonna
charge.
bring it in.
My God.
We got equal in here, man. That's a good one. Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yikes!
So
Yikes! Kind of sums up like the whole past hour of this
the
pod.
past-
Of what is it? It's not a podcast.
no, this is a book show.
book show.
Book
Yeah,
show.
book
We
show.
show off our books.
Welcome
Yes.
to the book show.
So we're gonna wind it down here. We hit our average here by talking about all kinds of stuff. So
Nice.
this
so
has
average.
been
So
the Fall Book
average.
Club. Okay. If you're watching, we're streaming here live on Twitch, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can join us on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Central Time. The links should all be in the description below. And if you don't already have a copy of this book, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, it's not too late. You can join us in reading through chapters 5 through 8 and order one from Amazon. There's a link in the description below. And if you use that link, a portion of that sale will go to support the Fall Book Club. So, because we have to buy all these as well, and it gets expensive. So, we'd also like to make different upgrades to the show.
For your viewing pleasure.
Yeah, for your viewing pleasure.
Stop
to
winking
do all
at the
kinds-
I know that's like the 5th time I've winked at the camera. I apologize.
So saucy. So we appreciate everybody coming in here. Thank you so much to Spaden, Zist, the Faceless Reenactor, and Equal Example, Jack. Thank you guys so much for coming in and chatting with us. It means a lot.
Yay.
We will be back with you guys next week. So we appreciate it. And if our technician wants